Hello everyone, Stepan here. I'll continue the series on Bobby Fischer with a great game he played against Vasil Panov, or Vasily Panov, who is the player the Panov-Botvinnik attack got named after, of course, Mikhail Botvinnik and Vasil Panov. So a great Caro-Kann player, obviously, and definitely a player who knew how to play against the Caro-Kann. So the Panov attack is played with white pieces, and that's exactly why he probably wanted to surprise Fischer, and he knew that Fischer played the two knights variation of the Caro-Kann, so he prepared, well, not a surprise, but a less usual variation. And the game was played in Skopje in '67, and that's the first big international tournament Yugoslavia organized as part of a series, and it was played a couple of months before the SUS Interzonal, which was to determine the challengers for the World Championship match, of course. And Fischer announced that he's going to play in the Interzonal already, which was, well, in those days he had to announce whether he's going to play a tournament, because he usually withdrew from a tournament, or in recent years he actually didn't compete in international chess at all. And during this tournament, there were problems as well. The biggest rivals for first place to Fischer were Efim Geller, one of the oldest Soviet players, still very strong though, and Matanović, who was the strongest Yugoslavian player in the tournament, and the rest were Yugoslavian players, but not as strong as Soviet grandmasters or Bobby Fischer. And in round 9, Bobby Fischer started to ask the organizers to remove the audience, to change the chessboards, etc. And he actually forfeited his 10th game. He forfeited round 10, but then the organizers who couldn't, of course, meet his expectations, managed to remove the audience, and he got to play a replay of his 10th game. And even though he forfeited, he got to play. He won. He beat Matanović, and he ended up winning the tournament by half a point. So it was successful after all. But I would say that the game is more exciting than the stories behind the tournament. So e4 by Bobby Fischer, of course, c6 by Vasil Panov. And this already is an interesting opening, considering who is playing. Bobby Fischer is a great two knights variation player, and Vasil Panov is one of the strongest Caro-Kann players at the time. If you don't count the Soviets, they were strongest at everything. So knight to c3, d5, knight to f3, the two knights variation. And the most common way to play this, and this is played, I would say 80% of the time, is bishop g4, h3, bishop takes, queen takes, c6. This is the starting position which most players get out of the two knights. However, after knight to f3, Panov went for d takes e4, which is a slightly less common variation, and now, of course, knight takes e4, knight to f6, and in all Caro-Kann variations, when the black player plays knight to f6, you take it basically, whether the knight's on d7 or not, you take the knight. So knight takes f6, e takes f6, and here I think d4 is the most common move, and I was actually preparing this variation against one opponent with black pieces. I was going to play with black pieces, and d4 is the best move. Bobby Fischer played bishop to c4, which is okay as well, and usually the positions are going to transpose, and Bobby Fischer is going to play d4 later on anyway. Now bishop to d6, a normal developing move, castles, d4, and here black should continue with either rook to e8 or bishop to g4. These are very logical moves. Panov, however, played bishop to e6, which is, I think, a horrible move. Even though it undoubles black's pawns, the only structural weakness, the doubled f-pawns, it creates a clear weakness on e6. And now, of course, bishop takes e6, f takes e6, and rook to e1, immediately putting pressure on the e6 pawn. Rook to e8, and now c4. I think c3 would have been more sensible and safer, because you aren't really threatening to push through with d5. But yeah, and c4 gave an opportunity to Panov to play the move c5. I think this was the best move, and I started calculating this variation, and I immediately started calculating d5, because if black takes, then queen takes check, and you have a greatly centralized queen. And if he doesn't take, if he plays, I think the best move here is knight to a6, preparing to play knight to c7. defending the center, then this actually doesn't win a pawn, d takes e6, because if rook e6, if you take the rook, you lose the queen, of course. yeah, so this doesn't work. So after c5, d5 actually shouldn't be played. I think the best move would be to simply capture on c5, but then I wouldn't like the bishop staring at my f2 pawn. So after c4, Panov should have played c5, and c4 was a mistake. However, he played knight to a6, which is too passive. Now we have bishop d2, queen to d7. And bishop to d2, of course, makes this tactic possible because now the queen is defended and it's not even attacked. So bishop c3, bishop to b4, queen to b3. And now bishop takes c3, and you always want to capture with the pawn towards the center, no matter your pawns being doubled, because your d4 pawn is a weakness. And once b takes c3, then the d4 pawn is actually a strength and controlling two key squares in the center of the board. Now knight to c7, which of course isn't that useful because of the c4 pawn, a4, and locking down this this pawn structure on the queen side, because if black manages to get in b5, then he's going to be better. Now we have b6, h3, making luft for the king, rook a b8, rook to e4. And this actually gave up a lot of Fischer's advantage because, well, engine-wise. From a human perspective, I think it's one of the best moves, because white is simply preparing to play queen to c2, rook to h4, and threaten a lot of checkmates. So this is an attacking plan which is very brute, but if you don't react immediately, you're going to lose the game. So now we have a6, a very passive and weird move, but okay, it's preparing the move b5. I think b6 was a mistake then. If well, it wasn't a mistake actually. If black had only played a6 without b6, then a4, a5 would have been possible, locking down the structure. And I think this is still a mistake because black is going to waste 3 tempi to push through with b5. In the meanwhile, queen to c2, preparing to checkmate the king, b5. And now Fischer exchanges everything. A takes, c takes, c takes, and now knight to d2. And this is, I think, a great move, firstly because it's freeing up the f3 square, which is going to be crucial for the attack. Secondly, it's defending the rook. Thirdly, it's defending c4. If at any point black pushes here, then white can play knight here and threaten to enter the position. And I think this is a great move. Firstly, I mean, you don't want your minor pieces in the attack when they don't have any available squares, even though it might seem visually nicer to have a lot of pieces around your opponent's king. This knight was actually in the way here. So I think knight to d2 is the best move. And from an engine perspective, black is slightly better, believe it or not. But how does black attack? If you're playing the black pieces here, what would be your plan of attack? And if you try to take the a file, then simply rook to e1. And after that, rook to h4. So, and that's exactly what happened. Rook to a8, rook a to e1, queen to d5. Rook to h4, and here black had a chance to keep his advantage, and the best move here was f5, simply locking down the pawns and preventing the queen from attacking the h7 pawn. After this, knight to f3, staring at the e5 square, of course, but rook a2, chasing the queen away, queen d3, queen to c4, you have to exchange, and your c3 pawn is going to drop, and you're going to have some issues. And in this position, black is definitely better. However, after rook h4, Panov didn't play f5, he played queen to f5, which is a bad move. Now, after queen to f5, if Fischer decides to take, then the position is equal. The doubled f pawns mean absolutely nothing. So Fischer plays a beautiful move, knight to e4. Even though it's pinned to the queen, even though the queen is loose for the moment, the knight is defended 3 times. This diagonal is weak, so the queen always has room to maneuver and to escape the pin. And now we have e5, rook to e3, and this is why moving the knight was important in the first place. This is freeing up the f3 square. h6, rook to f3. And now this position is already losing. Here Panov played queen to h7, and I wonder if you can spot the winning tactic here. I mean, it's not that hard to spot actually. Well, Fischer took on f6, he sacrificed the knight. So knight takes f6 check, you have to take, basically, otherwise you lose the queen, or you get checkmated. No, you don't, you can move the king to f8. So g takes f6. And now another great move, rook to g3 check, king to h8, and now not, of course, taking the queen, that would be a mistake, but rook to g6, threatening to take here. On h6, threatening queen here, taking here, and just completely winning. And let me show you the most obvious variation, I think. H5, trying to save the position. Of course, if you allow white to take on h6, then you lose the queen. So h5 would be one good try, I think. So now queen f5, knight to e6 would be the best move. And now queen takes f6 check, knight to g7, and after rook takes h5, that would be over. The knight is pinned, the queen can't take because you get checkmated, you lose the queen, you lose the game, and that's it. A 30-move miniature in which Panov tried to surprise Fischer with this variation of the two knights, and I always feel sorry for Fischer's opponents when they try to exit the mainline theory and they get just completely smashed. And I like Panov, I like his style and I like his games, and I'm sorry he lost this way, but still Fischer is Fischer, and he played great. So yeah, I hope you got something from this video, especially if you're a Caro-Kann player or an e4 player. If you play e4 against the Caro-Kann and you play the two knights, then this is something you should learn. And for players with the black pieces, for Caro-Kann players, this is a variation you should study because it's not bad for black. The move bishop to e6 was a mistake here. After d4, black is completely equal. Black has equalized despite having doubled pawns. In this position, just remember to play something normal, such as bishop to g4, and you're okay. So this variation is great, but don't make a mistake, like Panov did. Okay, thanks very much for watching, everybody. I hope you got something from this game, and stay tuned for more chess. See you later. Bye.